This video is supported by Golden Era Muscle. Please visit goldeneramuscle.com for training information and supplements. Hi everybody, Golden Era Bookworm here. Today I'd like to talk about how Zane developed one of the most insane vacuum poses of all time. If there is ever a man who developed the vacuum to the highest degree of perfection in the history of Golden Era bodybuilding, it has to be Zane, and I think this photo exemplifies this to the highest degree. I would have to say this photo also would represent the pinnacle of vacuum development. And so in today's video, what we are going to look at is the importance of vacuuming and also the procedure of developing the vacuum and the vacuum pose. This photo, I think, is iconic. It represents Zane and his incredible ability of holding the breath in such a difficult pose and have incredible control of his waistline, which I think is completely lacking in today's bodybuilding. I mean, if you look at his face, again, I always like looking at the faces of bodybuilders, especially in the golden era, because they are always relaxed. And it just goes to show how they actually practice these poses, these very difficult poses, so many times that you can see Frank can afford to pull off a little smirk because he knows this is his pose. He's practiced it probably 10,000 times, for God's sake. It's just beautiful. It is impressive. And my God, I mean, you see this and it's just wow. I mean, it's just so impressive. So let's have a look at how Zane developed his insane vacuum. So let's look at the importance of the vacuum. Of course, the vacuum itself, the practice of it, reduces the waistline, and in doing so, it tones the visceral organs. By that I mean the actual organs inside the abdominal region, that is the intestines, the liver, etc. Now, when you actually pull the stomach in, what happens is the organs actually get pushed, there's pressure on them, and the blood that actually is inside them actually has a chance to be circulated out, which brings new blood to the region. So it's actually a very health producing practice, which I'll go through a little bit later on. Of course, by toning and reducing the waistline, you have control of the waistline and control of the breath. That's why when you look at this pose of Zane again, this vacuum pose, you can see it is effortless. It is all over his face. And having control of the breath, control of the waistline, gives you artistic posing. It gives you the ability to actually present an aesthetic side of bodybuilding, which is completely negligent nowadays. It is not seen. Maybe now in the appearance of classic physique, but this kind of practice would obviously get rid of the bubble gut. And when you would see the posing, these guys can barely walk 3 feet without huffing and puffing. And so there is no control of the breath or the waistline in modern bodybuilding. And it is so important to bring the vacuum pose and the art of vacuuming back. Now, what is the actual vacuum? Believe it or not, the vacuum is actually a yogic technique, and it actually falls under the yogic techniques called Kriya. How do I know all this? Well, I'm actually, believe it or not, a yoga instructor. And I've actually been teaching yoga and practicing yoga for about 15 years. It actually falls under the name of Uddiyana Bandha, and a bandha itself is a lock. A lock is when you actually constrict muscles. Now, as mentioned earlier, the vacuum gives you abdominal control. And the abdominal control here is an actual lock, a contraction of the muscle. And its name is Uddiyana Bandha. The muscle that is actually contracted is the transverse abdominis, which is like your weight belt around your waistline. What actually has to relax is the rectus abdominis, or the frontal anterior muscles that give you your 6-pack, 4-pack, or 8-pack, depending on your genetics. Your obliques need to relax, and of course, the diaphragm itself needs to stretch. And in working the diaphragm, in stretching the diaphragm, you actually get more efficient breathing overall. And this breath control in yogic terms is called pranayama. Now, again, these are techniques that have been lost, that were practiced before, and if brought back, when you work your diaphragm, you will actually end up with having more efficient breathing and more efficient abdominal control. And both of these will obviously help you on stage in competition, when posing is very important, when keeping the waistline in and contracted at all times, and having the ability to go from one pose fluidly into the other requires incredible breath control, again, not seen in today's modern bodybuilding. Now, before commencing any kind of vacuum practice, it's very important to understand the effects that it has on the body. Because you actually have bowel movements, that is, you're sucking your stomach in and contracting the transverse abdominis, you put a lot of pressure on the abdominal organs such as the bladder, the intestines, the liver, etc. And so it's important to do it on an empty stomach. And make sure that your bowels are empty too, if you know what I mean. If you got to go to the toilet, go now, right? The best times, therefore, to do it when you are hungry, when you are fasted. For example, early morning before breakfast, basically upon waking. This is why yogic practice is usually done first thing in the morning as well. If you can't do it in the morning, then it should be ideally done at least 2 hours after a meal. Why? Because the moment you start vacuuming, you're going to put a lot of pressure on your abdominal organs, and you could basically throw up. Another time to practice is before bed, after you've had your dinner, and hopefully it hasn't been a late dinner, and you can actually do it a few hours after your last meal. Now, contraindications to doing vacuuming. Vacuuming is a very powerful exercise. As I mentioned earlier, it's actually a cleansing exercise, and a cleansing technique in yogic terms is called a kriya, right? And so if you have actually high blood pressure, hernia, or ulcers in your abdominal region, you shouldn't be actually doing it. Another thing is that if you're a female and you want to practice vacuuming, it should be done when you're pregnant or menstruate during your menstrual cycle, or basically at the end of your menstrual cycle when you're menstruating. It's not a good idea either. Now, the procedure of vacuuming is something that a lot of people get wrong. Let me go through the actual five major steps that are involved. The first being that you exhale completely. In doing so, by exhaling completely, it's not a normal exhalation. You actually have to force as much air out as possible, and you need to contract your chest and especially your abs to get every little ounce of air out. The more you exhale, the better the vacuum will be, and the easier the vacuuming will be. After that, you lock your throat. As mentioned earlier, it is a bandha, a lock. So therefore, you need to contract certain muscles. In this case, it's the muscles around your throat. You basically have to prevent air from coming in, and you do a mock inhalation by locking the throat. It's called a mock inhalation because you actually don't inhale, but the muscles that are involved in inhaling actually do the work. You must relax the abs, you pull in the stomach, and you lift the chest. And here is where the mock inhalation is. It looks like you're breathing, but you are not. The chest lifts, and it lifts because the diaphragm stretches. And as it stretches, it creates a hollow concave in the abdominal region known as the vacuum. For beginners, the idea is to actually block the nose and mouth, and with time, you learn to block all the region around the throat and the respiratory region that it prevents you from breathing during the mock inhalation. Now, the third step is to hold your breath as long as possible, and as you're doing so, you can pull in the stomach further. You have to think that you are pulling your stomach all the way to the back of your spine. You're almost trying to touch your stomach to your spine. And what's actually working at this point is the contraction of the transverse abdominis, working harder and harder. The longer you can hold your breath, the more you pull in, the tinier the waist will become. Now, finally, once you're ready to breathe, you've had enough, you exhale and relax. First, you exhale, believe it or not, and relax the mock inhalation. All the muscles involved in locking the throat, in blocking air coming in, and the chest itself, the abs, all have to relax. Then, after you've relaxed and released the vacuum, do you finally breathe in. That's step 4. And after this, well, actually that's step 5, the inhalation. You take a few deep breaths. I'd say take a few deep breaths, like 3 deep breaths maybe, and then repeat. Ideally, the practice of vacuuming, as I said, done on an empty stomach. You should do 10 repetitions. It shouldn't take you more than a few minutes, and ideally repeated several times a day. Now here are some scans from Unleashing the Wild Physique by Vince Gironda, where he actually demonstrates in a diagrammatic form the 2 major steps in performing the vacuum. Here he is preferring to lean over on a bench, and I'll actually go through the progressive ways of doing the vacuum in the next slide. But you can see that he starts off by breathing out. He's actually breathing out in the first picture and contracting his belly. You can see he's contracting his chest and his abdominals to get every ounce of air out. When he's ready to do the vacuum, he pulls his stomach in and his chest lifts, and he's even using the back. He's actually arching his back a bit to get the vacuum in deeper and deeper. The idea is to get as much of your diaphragm stretched up into your rib cage as possible to create an even deeper vacuum. Of course, after that, you relax, as I said, all the muscles involved, and you take a nice deep breath in. Now, there are several progressive steps in doing the vacuum. For absolute beginners, you need to understand that gravity assists you. And gravity assists you because when you are basically pushing the diaphragm up and into your rib cage, you are going against gravity, right? And so the ideal position to start vacuuming for a beginner would be upside down. But we all don't have the ability to just practice the vacuum upside down now, do we? So a good place to start is on a decline bench, and you can do your vacuums there. The next progression would be lying on the floor, just flat on the floor, and doing vacuumings there. The following progression would be to actually turn around as if you were crawling on your hands and knees and do your vacuuming practice in such a position. The next progression after that would be actually sitting on your butt with your knees crossed and your hands on your knees, like you just sit cross-legged, and you do vacuums in this position. The next progressive step after that would be standing up, like in the previous photo that you saw Vince Gironda leaning on a bench, bent forward. And now if you don't have a bench or a chair, you can simply put your hands on your knees and standing up, practice the vacuum in such a position. The final progressive step is standing up without bending forward, completely straight, hands clasped behind the neck as in the vacuum pose, and you've reached the advanced level. At this point, you would work on holding for time for as long as possible, and this is the most advanced level of vacuuming. Finally, troubleshooting. So I'd like to talk about troubleshooting because I've already received lots of emails from people saying, oh, I can't get the vacuum right, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, la da da da. There's basically 3 reasons why people can't do the vacuum. Firstly, if you don't exhale enough in the beginning, you are not going to get a good vacuum. You must completely exhale, and this actually means contracting the chest and abdominals as much as possible. The second reason why people fail in the vacuum is that when they actually do the mock inhalation, they actually allow a bit of air in. You basically have to hold your nose and mouth closed and lock the throat. This means closing off the whole respiratory channel. You can't allow any air in. You've got to lock the throat away. Now, the most common reason why people fail in the vacuum is actually that they don't relax the abdomen during the mock inhalation. You have to relax the abdominals first to actually pull the abdominal in. Otherwise, you won't get a vacuum. If you tense the abdominals, you will not get a good vacuum. What actually has to tense is the transverse abdominis, and the abdominals need to be relaxed. Therefore, if you believe that the vacuum is an actual abdominal pose which involves tensing the abdominals, this is not the vacuum pose, and you are counteracting the vacuum pose. The abdominals need to be relaxed. The only thing that that contracts there is the transverse abdominal. Now these vacuum poses of Frank Zane are forever iconic. They are impressive to say the least, and what adds to the perfect vacuum pose are the following factors. That is how defined you are, how shredded you are. In these photos, of course, you can see that Frank has absolutely beautiful definition. His skin is paper thin. You can see the veins, for God's sake, under his armpit. It's incredible. They're running through his arms, forearms, down his lats, for God's sake, and even through his abdominals and legs. He is so defined. And the muscles, of course, if they are full and round and developed, it actually ends up looking, to me, it is actually a very aesthetic muscular pose, kind of like a most muscular. Because in a most muscular, you're not supposed to see any gaps. And you can see that by bringing your hands behind your head, there shouldn't be any gaps between your arms and your head. So in many respects, it's very similar to a most muscular pose, except that the waist looks completely tiny. On top of that, well-developed serratus muscles, as you can see clearly here in the poses as shown here by Frank Zane. They're beautifully developed, and the intercostals that lie between the ribcage will also add to the phenomenal impressiveness of the vacuum pose. So all of these factors come into play in a perfect vacuum pose as executed by the iconic Frank Zane. Incredible, incredible. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this extensively detailed video on the art of vacuums. I hope you've learned something, and if you've liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't to the Golden Era Bookworm, and let me know what you think. Thank you for watching, and I'll leave you with this iconic photo of Frank Zane. You know what, everybody, if you've reached to the end of this video, get this photo, have a screenshot, and go to your printer and put it on your t-shirt or tank top, and go to the gym and spread this photo around. Everybody should be doing the vacuum pose, goddammit. So get to it. Alright, this is Golden Era Bookworm. Bye for now.